Welcome to episode 9 of Secrets of the Universe, Walking the Conscious Path with Steve Hasenberg. I'm Greg Agnew. In this episode and the next episode, we're going to focus on what Steve calls beings of light.
And Greg, you are a being of light.
Oh, you're too kind. I return the compliment.
Thank you.
So what does this phrase mean? I know you were ill for quite some time.
Yeah, well, what I wanted to talk about today was the silver lining in my illness. And so we talked about this way back probably in video 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. And I talked about the fact that I was ill with Epstein-Barr virus and brain inflammation for about 3 years. Probably a year and a half out of that, I started having experiences, spiritual experiences, that were really notable. They were much like what we've talked about in the series, where I felt interconnected with the world. I would go outside in the morning and I would feel the breeze, but I would feel in a completely new way. It was like the breeze itself was thrilling to me.
So this was while you were ill or after you recovered?
Yeah, so this was about a year and a half after I got better. And I think actually, in as much as you're bringing that up, I think what that experience did for me, and this could happen for anybody, if you use illness for yourself rather than against yourself, the possibility is that you'll make tremendous strides with your growth. And so I did that when I could. I didn't do it all the time because you can't. Sometimes you're angry and sometimes you're very frustrated and you think it will never end. But generally I used that experience, as difficult as it was, and by using it I became more compassionate toward myself and more loving toward myself and also more compassionate toward others. And I think it was the compassion that I had toward myself and others that allowed this blossoming of spirituality.
You were talking about being more aware, and I know when I've done meditation with you and we've done walking meditation, mm-hmm. There is that sudden awareness you have for the leaves and the breeze and the winds. So it sounds almost like it's a similar experience to that.
It's a similar experience to that times maybe 10 or 20. So I was being cast in these situations where I'd be walking on the beach and you would feel the sun on your face, but it was as if the sun was actually speaking with me. It was as if the sun was having a relationship with me. And when you and I spoke about the sacred traditions, and those sacred traditions would speak about the fact that all of Earth became alive. There was an aliveness everywhere. I was beginning to feel this aliveness, but it was very powerful. It was so strong that I would often start crying. So to give you an example, one of those workshops that you were in,
right.
I was doing probably 7 of them that year. And the one after that, I probably had 15 or 20 people in. And while I was talking about some subject, I was overtaken with love. And the love was so intense that I started crying. And I thought, I'm leading a workshop on Buddhist loving kindness, and now I'm crying hysterically in front of the group, and I couldn't control it. But the love was so potent. So what I'm speaking about is that in terms of spiritual experience for me, and then after the year and a half it became ongoing, experiences of very powerful kind of divine love. Experiences of the sun touching me, being thrilled by the wind, seeing people in the supermarket and falling in love with them. I mean, that was really unusual. One day I was, not that it's somebody I would necessarily fall in love with,
right.
But somebody I remember in the flower department of Gelson's, and I looked at her and I just felt her soul. And I thought, we're both here together and we're both eternal beings. So that kind of experience was happening more and more.
So what do you put it down to? What is the direct connection to that increased sensitivity, that increased connection with other people, and your illness?
So really, Greg, I thought about it a lot, and with the self-compassion and self-love, probably the most powerful and fundamental thing was appreciation for life itself. Because as much as I meditated, when it's hard to walk, when it's difficult to speak, when you don't know if you're ever going to get better, when you've lost your practice, the appreciation from moment by moment becomes really powerful. And I think I had to practice that appreciation to get through it. And that appreciation kind of expanded inside of me. And I think it's one of the reasons that it's almost like life saying to me, wow, look how much he appreciates us. And then let's give something to him. It was like in the rituals we talked about in the old traditions, they did rituals to the gods, and they fed the gods with the rituals, and the gods fed them with good circumstance. So it's kind of like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you have any near-death experiences while you were ill?
I didn't have any near-death experiences while I was ill, but it felt like a near-death experience.
The entire thing?
In so many ways, yeah.
Right. Before we did this, you were telling me about after you were ill, you would have people come into your office and you would see an aura of light.
Right.
It was like a new vision that you didn't have previously.
Right. Great. That's a great question, because I really wanted to talk about that. The extension of all of this openness, my heart was bursting open with love. My mind was also bursting, because as I was feeling and sensing new things, new thoughts came in. So it's almost like the earth was supplying me with new data about who the earth was and who my experience and what my experience was. So one day when I was in the office, a client came in and she sat down, and immediately I noticed that there was this gorgeous blue light behind her head. And it was so powerful. First, I was a little taken aback. I was a little shocked. I had read about auras in the past, but I'd never seen them. But this was so potent that I remember not being able to listen to what she was talking about,
right,
because I was so mesmerized by the light. And so that aura, or that, I call it now a light being, that we are all light beings. I realized when client after client after client came in, each client was coming in with a light body. And the light body would sometimes be small, sometimes be less intense, sometimes take over almost the whole room, different colors. Primarily I would see white, sometimes red. Red would come when people were talking about their fears, and the light behind them would turn red. Or maybe as a matter of fact, it may be the light turned red and then they would talk about their fears. That's actually more accurate. So I realized over time, and this has been going on for about a year and a half now.
Right.
And I realized over time that everybody had a light body. And that these light bodies were part of the soul. And the soul is the eternal part of ourselves. And so what I was experiencing after my illness, and what I experienced during those out-of-body experiences we talked about in the first tape, I was leaving my ego, and I was experiencing part of my soul. And so I was experiencing that peace, that bliss, that interconnectedness, the same experiences that people had when they had the near-death experiences. So I was actually going into a situation within my psyche, within my consciousness, where on a daily basis I was having some of the experiences that people had with near-death experiences. I was having some of the experiences that they had thousands of years ago in the ancient traditions. Mm-hmm. I was beginning to see these auras around people, and it was changing the way that I was relating to life itself.
So you called the auras light bodies. So was it almost like you were communicating with two entities every time you were seeing someone?
I was. And I was, as I just said, it was very hard for me. I got used to it.
Yeah.
It was very hard for me to focus. I then began seeing the light outside of the office. Now this was extraordinary because I realized that we're all eternal souls having human experiences. I had read about that, Greg, for a long time, you know, in the spiritual books I read and the self-help books. They would always say, we are spiritual beings having human experiences. And I would have little shots of that during my life. But now on a daily basis, and actually I have it now, on a daily basis I was having the experience of being more of the eternal part of me and less of the human. But the most interesting thing about that is that as you have more of the eternal, which means more open-heartedness, more clarity of mind, more internal silence, as that was becoming the fabric of my daily life, I was beginning to see the same thing in other people. It's as if I was granted this gift, and so I would see the stillness in others. Or I would look at somebody and see the mystery of the creation in them. Or I would fall in love with somebody, not romantically, but I would fall in love with who they were. So that led me to the idea that as souls, we're like playwrights.
That's a good subject, a good place for us to end this one and tease the next one.
Okay.
So we're talking about beings of light, and in the next one we'll talk about how we are the playwrights of our own lives.
Of our own destiny.
Our souls are, yes. So that's in episode 10 of Secrets of the Universe, Walking the Conscious Path with Steve Hasenberg. I'm Greg Agnew.